I was savoring my first real moment of peace in 36 hours. A quiet, sunlit Thursday morning in our suburban Boston home, when my husband completely shattered my life over a plate of avocado toast. "I'm going to stay at Elena's place for a month," Julian said, his voice as casual and smooth as if he were announcing a routine corporate business trip. He paused to sip his perfectly frothed macchiato, looking at me with absolute composure. "It's just a temporary transition, Valerie. A chance to reset our marital boundaries. Honestly, you should be happy, I'm telling you first. It's not really wrong if I'm being fully transparent, right?" He actually smiled, a slick, practiced upturn of his lips that he usually reserved for landing high-net-worth marketing clients. He sat there looking smug, as if he deserved a medal for psychological chivalry, just because he had the decency to look me in the eye while stabbing me in the heart. Across the expansive quartz island, his 21-year-old daughter Chloe was already perfectly positioned. She was leaning against the Sub-Zero refrigerator, holding her iPhone 15 Pro Max at a meticulous 45-degree angle. Her thumb hovered over the record button, her eyes gleaming with the predatory hunger of a social media influencer who smelled viral blood. She wasn't just waiting for me to break down. She was actively curating my public humiliation, ready to broadcast my shattered dignity to her 50,000 TikTok followers under the guise of an authentic stepmom drama vlog. To my left, my 16-year-old son, Leo, sat frozen. His fork hung suspended over his scrambled eggs, his knuckles white as he gripped the polished silver. I could feel the waves of confusion, fear, and sheer protective instinct radiating from him. But he was young, outmatched, and utterly terrified for me. And me, I sat entirely still. My sterling silver spoon remained halfway to my mouth, a dollop of Greek yogurt dripping agonizingly slow back into the porcelain bowl. Drip, drip. In the heavy, suffocating silence of that luxury kitchen, something inside me went completely cold and quiet. It was a profound, absolute stillness. I didn't scream. I didn't smash Julian's artisanal coffee cup against his pristine veneers. I didn't cry. Instead, I carefully lowered my spoon, allowing the metal to clink softly against the rim of the dish. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, my voice dropping into a level, measured register that caught them both off guard. "You're planning to move into your ex-wife's Beacon Hill penthouse for the next 30 days, and you genuinely believe that giving me a courtesy notice makes this acceptable?" Julian blinked, his slick confidence faltering for a microsecond before he recovered his boardroom smile. "I'm practicing emotional honesty, Valerie. Isn't that what you always say? You want transparency?" Chloe scoffed from behind her screen, lowering the phone just an inch. "Oh, come on, Valerie, don't be so toxic and controlling. Dad is just asking for creative space. Honestly, you're acting like a total narcissist right now." I didn't turn my head to look at her. I kept my gaze locked on the man I had financially, socially, and emotionally carried for the last 7 years. I felt a strange, familiar calm wash over me, settling deep into my bones. It was the exact same clinical coldness that takes over my entire being whenever a patient codes on my operating table. When an aortic aneurysm ruptures and blood is filling a chest cavity, there is no time for panic. There is no room for tears. There is only calculated, ruthless action. Every move must be precise. Every cut must be intentional. "Transparency is highly valuable, Julian," I said quietly, rising from my bar stool with a slow, deliberate grace. "I appreciate the update, but let me be equally transparent with you. If you walk out of that front door today, you are not taking a single cent of what I have built with you." Julian laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that echoed uncomfortably off the custom cabinetry. "What is that supposed to mean? You can't just freeze me out because your feelings are hurt. That's not how a marriage works." "Try me," I said, my tone as sharp as a scalpel. I picked up my breakfast bowl, walked it over to the sink, and rinsed it thoroughly under the streaming water. My hands were perfectly steady. "Okay," I said, turning back to face the courtroom of my own kitchen. Let me make a phone call. That phone call would ultimately change everything. It would dismantle Julian's carefully constructed world of luxury terminate, Chloe's subsidized lifestyle, and trigger a high-stakes liquidation that none of them saw coming. But to understand why I reacted with such lethal calm that morning, why I didn't fall apart or beg him to stay, you need to understand exactly who I was before Julian Sterling ever tried to play me for a fool. My name is Dr. Valerie Sterling. I am 42 years old, and I work as a chief orthopedic trauma surgeon at a level 1 trauma center in the heart of Boston. Every single morning without fail, my alarm goes off at 500 a.m. in the freezing Massachusetts dark. While the rest of the elite city is sleeping, I am already out of bed, walking down the hardwood halls of our historic suburban estate to brew a pot of black coffee. I don't wear designer labels to work. I pull on a pair of navy blue, industrial-grade hospital scrubs, soft from 1,000 harsh chemical washes, practical and stained with the phantom memories of crises averted. I leave our house before the sun even hints at breaking the horizon. My shifts are grueling marathon stretches of 12 to 24 hours. They are filled with running trauma codes, reassembling shattered bones from high-speed pile-ups on I-95, charting meticulous vitals, and holding the trembling hands of dying strangers while their grief-stricken families weep in crowded waiting rooms. I come home with an aching back, stiff joints, and hands that smell of heavy medical antiseptic, no matter how many times I scrub them at the sink. But I have never once complained about the brutal nature of my profession, because that grueling job pays the massive mortgage on our 5-bedroom property. It keeps the high-end appliances running and the lights on. It pays for Leo's elite private boarding school tuition and ensures he has every resource he needs to build a real future. And up until this very morning, it fully funded the illusion of Julian Sterling's success. Julian liked to call himself a partner in our life, but a partner implies an equal distribution of weight. For 7 years, I was the one bearing the crushing gravity of our lifestyle, while Julian floated seamlessly on the surface, buoyed by my income. I was the creative director at a mid-tier marketing firm, a title that sounded incredibly impressive at cocktail parties in Beacon Hill, but yielded a salary that barely covered his own monthly Porsche lease and his taste for bespoke Italian suits. He possessed a slick, effortless charm, a silver tongue that could sell ice to an Alaskan in January. He always spoke in grand, sweeping narratives about venture capital injections that were just around the corner, about massive tech clients that were on the verge of signing, and how next fiscal quarter was going to completely redefine the agency. I had learned a long time ago to just nod, smile, and sip my wine while I secretly managed the family ledger. I made sure the property taxes on our historic estate were paid, handled the staggering insurance premiums required for a chief surgeon, and quietly transferred funds whenever his business account dipped into the red. It was an unspoken arrangement that I tolerated because I believed marriages were built on seasons of sacrifice. I convinced myself that his charm compensated for his lack of financial stability, that his vibrant social energy balanced out my cold, clinical, exhausting reality. But our home felt increasingly crowded, a pressure cooker masked by high ceilings and crown molding. When Chloe turned 21 and moved back into the estate for the summer from her expensive avant-garde art school in New York, the atmospheric pressure reached a breaking point. Chloe had inherited her father's absolute unearned confidence, but she possessed none of his mitigating charm. She was loud, fiercely opinionated, and fundamentally detached from the reality of labor. She viewed our home not as a sanctuary, but as a backdrop for her digital persona. She moved through the house with a permanent sneer, her eyes glued to her screen, constantly filming herself unboxing designer goods that were billed directly to my secondary credit cards. She had a sickeningly subtle way of reminding me that I was merely the stepmother, the transactional provider, rather than the biological priority. She would make passing comments about how biological aesthetic couldn't be replaced by career prestige, or how her real mother, Eleanor, had an innate sense of luxury that money simply couldn't buy. I never directly engaged with her provocations. I was a surgeon. I didn't engage in petty brawls with children. For a brief period, we maintained a domestic routine that mimicry required to look like a functional blended family. On Sunday evenings, we would gather in the expansive kitchen for meal prep. It was a structured performance. All four of us would circle the marble island chopping organic vegetables and portioning out lean proteins for the high-intensity week ahead. Julian would dominate the conversation dramatically, recounting the corporate politics of his agency, complaining about demanding accounts, incompetent junior executives and CEOs who didn't grasp his creative vision. Chloe would lean against the counter, scrolling through her metrics, occasionally looking up to offer a sarcastic critique of my organization or show her father a viral video. Leo was the quiet anchor of those evenings. My 16-year-old son would work silently at my side, his hands steady as he measured out portions, keeping his head low to avoid drawing the critical fire of his stepsister. He was a brilliant, observant boy who had learned how to navigate the egos in our household by making himself invisible. I would chop, pack, and organize, systematically keeping the peace, playing the role of the grounded matriarchal rock that held this fragile alliance together. On weeknights, we would occasionally stream documentaries or prestige dramas in the home theatre. Julian always controlled the remote. His aesthetic preferences dictated our cultural consumption. We would sit on the sprawling custom sectional me, on the far left end, still vibrating from the adrenaline of the trauma bay. Julian on the far right, and Leo squeezed protective and quiet in the middle. Chloe would sprawl in the adjacent leather armchair, her face illuminated by the harsh blue glow of her phone, half watching the screen and half managing her comment sections. We would share a bowl of artisanal popcorn, making superficial comments about the cinematography or the plot. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't a marriage born of deep, soul-stirring romance or profound mutual respect. There were no midnight conversations about our shared dreams. No moments where I looked across the room at Julian and felt a spark of genuine intimacy or emotional safety. It was stable, it was predictable, it was safe. I had spent years treating patients whose lives were ripped apart by sudden catastrophic violence, and because of that, I placed an immense value on predictability. I convinced myself that a mild, companionship-based marriage was a luxury. I told myself that blended families required friction, that young adults were naturally difficult, and that Julian was simply navigating a prolonged professional rut. I told myself this was just a quiet season, a stable season, and that things would inevitably recalibrate. Except about 8 months ago, the baseline metrics of our marriage began to shift. The warning signs didn't appear as a sudden cardiac arrest. They manifested as a slow, malignant arrhythmia that I chose to document rather than diagnose. It began with the defensive positioning of his technology. Julian had always been careless with his phone, leaving it unlocked on the nightstand, or tossing it onto the kitchen island without a second thought. But then, almost imperceptibly, he began angling the screen away from me whenever I entered a room. It was a slight, instinctive tilt of his wrist. Nothing dramatic enough to warrant an immediate accusation, but enough to obscure the notifications. Within weeks, the phone was permanently face down, on every surface flipped over with an urgent defensive speed. The volume was switched to absolute silence, the vibration motor disabled. He began waking up at 4:30 a.m., a full half hour before my alarm, and I would wake to the faint, rapid clicking of digital typing coming from the darkness of the master bathroom. When I calmly inquired who was emailing him at such an ungodly hour, his voice would take on a rehearsed defensive cadence. Just a European client, Valerie. The time zones are brutal this quarter. It's nothing important, just creative copy adjustments. Then came the late-night strategy sessions. 2, sometimes 3 nights a week, my phone would buzz around 600 p.m. with a text message from Julian Urgent. pitch restructuring with the senior regional team. Going to be locked in the conference room late. Don't wait up. He wouldn't return to the estate until past midnight, walking through the door, smelling faintly of a heavy, exotic Tom Ford perfume that I absolutely did not own. My signature scent was clean, minimalist, and clinical. This was a cloying, predatory floral note that belonged in a high-end boutique. Despite having showered before leaving for the office that morning, he would bypass me entirely and head straight into the master bathroom, running the hot water for a second thorough scrub. When I sat up in bed and asked how the pitch had gone, he would offer vague, distracted platitudes. Fine, fine. You know how tech clients are demanding, analytical, completely devoid of creative intuition. I'm exhausted, let's just sleep. Chloe's behavior in the household mirrored her father's subterranean shift. She began smirking whenever Julian announced these late-night corporate emergencies at the dinner table. It was a knowing, arrogant expression, a look that communicated she possessed a piece of classified data that I was too oblivious to comprehend. She would look up from her device, lock eyes with me, then glance back down at her screen with a quiet, mocking chuckle, waiting for me to exhibit a symptom of suspicion or insecurity. I never gave her the satisfaction. I simply continued cutting my steak, clearing the table, and preparing my mind for my next 24-hour trauma rotation. But I recorded it. I documented every single look. Our dinner conversations degenerated into painful, hollow monologues. I would attempt to decompress by sharing the brutal reality of my day. The 19-year-old kid who had coded twice on my table after a motorcycle accident, and whom we had miraculously brought back through open-chest cardiac massage. I would speak of the profound, bony-deep exhaustion of telling a mother that her child didn't make it through surgery. Julian would sit across from me, his thumb methodically scrolling through his muted phone, offering automated, distracted murmurs of simulated empathy. Wow, incredible babe, that's tough. Leo would eat in absolute silence, his eyes cast down toward his plate, his highly sensitive nature detecting the massive tectonic shift occurring beneath the surface of our family, though he didn't know how to articulate the danger. Chloe would laugh aloud at a video on her screen, completely insulated from the heavy, suffocating air of the dining room. One evening, the absurdity of the charade became too heavy to ignore. Julian was smiling private and soft at a text message under the table, his face illuminated by the hidden glow, and I leveled a calm, direct gaze at him. What's the source of the amusement, Julian? Are you running a covert intelligence operation over there? I expected him to laugh it off with his signature marketing charm. Instead, his head snapped up, his jaw tightening as a flash of genuine anger crossed his features. You are always looking for non-existent crises, Valerie. He snapped, his voice carrying a sharp defensive venom that rattled the crystal glassware. Your job makes you completely paranoid. Not everything in life is a trauma case that needs to be dissected. The sudden violence in his tone caused Leo to freeze entirely, his fork hovering awkwardly in the air. Chloe looked up from her device, her eyes wide, and suddenly intensely interested, her instinct sensing blood in the water. I didn't escalate. I didn't defend myself. I calmly stood up, stacked my plate with precise mechanical movements, and retired to the guest bedroom early. That was the exact night I officially opened the mental case file on my marriage. I didn't write anything down on paper or create a digital document he could discover. I am a surgeon, and my memory is trained to retain complex medical histories, drug dosages, and precise anatomical structures. I began treating my failing marriage like a terminal patient under observation. I noted that his late-night strategy sessions always occurred on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I noted that Chloe became exceptionally cheerful and accommodating on those specific afternoons, dropping cryptic remarks like, "Dad is working so hard to elevate our lifestyle. We should really appreciate him more," while studying my face for a fracture. I told myself I was being analytical, calculated, and prepared. I refused to be the hysterical, blindsided wife who screams into the void when the truth finally breaks through. And then precisely 48 hours before that fateful morning over the avocado toast, the final diagnostic evidence fell directly into my hands. I was checking the pockets of his custom cashmere coat before sending it out with the weekly valet dry cleaning service. A routine administrative task I had performed 1,000 times. And there it was crumpled at the bottom of the silk lining, a physical printout receipt from the Mandarin Oriental in Boston. It was dated for the previous Tuesday night, registering a luxury executive suite under his personal corporate name. The very same Tuesday night he had texted me at 6:15 p.m., claiming he was trapped in a grueling multi-agency pitch meeting. I stood in the dim, cold morning light of our grand laundry room, holding that slip of paper, and felt the final residual warmth of my marriage completely evaporate. It was a beautiful, crystal-clear moment of absolute finality. I didn't confront him in a fit of rage. I didn't burn his clothes. I carefully folded the receipt along its original crease lines and slipped it back exactly where I had discovered it. Then I completed the dry cleaning inventory, drove to the hospital, executed 3 consecutive reconstructive surgeries with absolute flawless precision, and returned home, as if my world hadn't radically tilted on its axis. I knew the absolute truth now. The diagnosis was terminal. The prognosis was clear, and I was fully prepared to perform the amputation. When I stepped out of the kitchen that Thursday morning, leaving Julian to savor his delusional triumph and Chloe to edit her prospective viral video, I didn't feel a single tremor of panic. The transition from a betrayed wife to an operative trauma surgeon was seamless. In my world, emotion is a luxury that costs lives. When a patient is bleeding out on the table, you don't weep over the injury. You clamp the artery. I walked into the sanctuary of my home office, closed the heavy mahogany door, and locked it. I sat down at my desk, pulled up my secure laptop, and placed the phone call I had promised. It wasn't to a marriage counselor, and it certainly wasn't to a friend to cry on their shoulder. I called Marcus Vance. Marcus wasn't just a divorce attorney. He was a high-stakes asset liquidator who specialized in untangling complex financial webs for Boston's elite. We had gone to undergraduate school together at Boston College before he went to Harvard Law and I went to Johns Hopkins. I had saved his brother's leg after a catastrophic skiing accident 5 years ago. Marcus owed me everything, and he was a man who took his debts seriously. Valerie, Marcus answered on the second ring, his tone instantly shifting from corporate formality to acute alertness. It's barely 8 in the morning. What's wrong? The arrhythmia just became a full cardiac arrest, Marcus. I said, my voice dead calm. Julian just informed me he is moving back into Elena's Beacon Hill penthouse for a marital reset. His daughter is currently recording my reaction for social media clout. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the distinct sound of Marcus setting down his coffee cup and pulling a legal pad toward him. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into that lethal predatory register that made him the most feared litigator in New England. He actually did it, Marcus murmured almost entirely to himself. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity of that man never ceases to amaze me. Valerie, tell me you didn't scream cry or threaten him. I rinsed my yogurt bowl, told him I was making a phone call, and walked out. I replied. Perfect. Standard operating procedure, Marcus said, and I could practically hear the sharp, calculating smile on his face. Listen to me very carefully. Julian thinks he's playing a game of emotional chess, but he has no idea we've already mapped out the entire board. We aren't just filing for divorce, Valerie. We are initiating the liquidation protocol we prepared last month when you found that Mandarin Oriental receipt. Walk me through the immediate metrics, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. my eyes tracking the sunlight as it cut across the room. First, Marcus began, his tone sharp and methodical. The primary banking assets, the joint wealth management account at Corporate Boston Trust, holds approximately $2.4 million. As of exactly 4 weeks ago, per my instruction, you became the sole primary administrator of that specific liquidity pool because the seed capital originated entirely from your medical practice equity and your inheritance. I am executing the freeze order right now. By 8:30, Julian's black corporate Amex will be declined. He won't even be able to pay for the Uber to Elena's penthouse. And the real estate, I asked. The suburban estate you are currently sitting in is held under a blind domestic asset protection trust. Marcus explained, the sound of his pen scratching against paper cutting through the receiver. Julian is a beneficiary, but you are the sole trustee. The trust clauses state that any act of marital abandonment or cohabitation with a third party immediately suspends a beneficiary's residential rights. I am drafting the emergency eviction notice as we speak. A private security detail will be at your house by noon to escort him and his daughter off the premises. They will be allowed 1 suitcase each. Everything else stays. A cool, refreshing wave of absolute control washed over me. Julian had spent 7 years mistaking my quiet generosity for ignorance. He assumed that because I was consumed by the brutal, exhausting demands of the trauma bay, I wasn't paying attention to the plumbing of our financial architecture. He thought my silence was compliance. What about the marketing agency? I asked, looking down at my hands. They were perfectly steady. That's the beauty of the high-stakes liquidation, Valerie, Marcus said, his voice dripping with icy satisfaction. Julian's creative agency isn't his. He owns an 18% minority stake, but the commercial line of credit that keeps their payroll alive and funds their office space in the Seaport district is personally guaranteed by your medical corporation. I am withdrawing the financial guarantee effective at 9:30 a.m. when the commercial banking sector opens. Without your signature backing that debt, the board of directors will have no choice but to terminate his partnership by the end of the business day to save the firm from insolvency. I wanted a reset. I whispered, a slow, clinical smile finally touching my lips. I am simply giving him a complete systemic failure. Go back out there, Dr. Sterling, Marcus said quietly. Keep your stethoscope on their vitals. Let them think they are winning for exactly 30 more minutes. I'll see you in court. I hung up the phone. I took a deep, steadying breath, absorbing the quiet elegance of my office before standing up. I adjusted the collar of my navy blue scrubs, unlocked the door, and walked back out into the bright, expensive prison of my kitchen to watch the poison take effect. When I re-entered this kitchen, the atmosphere hadn't changed, but the countdown had already reached 0. Julian was leaning against the quartz island, confidently texting on his phone, no doubt coordinating his grand arrival at Eleanor's luxury penthouse. Chloe was still holding her device, looking thoroughly disappointed that I hadn't provided her with a dramatic, tear-filled breakdown to edit for her internet audience. Everything handled on your little phone call, Valerie? Julian asked, his voice laced with an arrogant, condescending pity. Look, I know this is a bitter pill to swallow, but in the long run, you'll see this emotional sabbatical is healthy for both of us. I'm just trying to save our marriage by taking a step back. I completely understand your perspective, Julian, I said, walking over to the espresso machine to pour myself a fresh cup of black coffee. I didn't look at him. I kept my back turned, listening to the subtle rhythms of their breathing. I think a step back is exactly what this family needs. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Wow. Talk about total capitulation. I guess the big, scary trauma surgeon isn't so tough when her husband actually grows a spine. Chloe, be nice, Julian chided, though his tone was entirely devoid of actual reprimand. He looked at his watch, an expensive gold Rolex that I had bought him for his 41st birthday. Well, the executive car should be outside in about 10 minutes. I'll have the movers come by next week to collect the rest of my wardrobe and my art collection. There won't be any need for movers, Julian, I said calmly, taking a slow sip of the hot, bitter coffee. Right at that exact moment, Julian's phone let out a strange, aggressive chime. It wasn't his standard text notification. It was the high-priority alert from his banking application. Almost simultaneously, Chloe's phone buzzed violently in her hand. I watched Julian's face closely. It was a fascinating medical study in psychological decomposition. The smug boardroom confidence vanished in a microsecond. His brow furrowed, his eyes widening as he stared at the screen. What the hell? He muttered, his thumb frantically tapping the glass. This has to be a system glitch. Dad? Chloe's voice suddenly lost its annoying, trendy cadence, shifting into a high-pitched spike of genuine panic. Dad, my Apple Pay just got declined for my clothing subscription, and my digital allowance transfer from the joint account just bounced. It says, account restricted. What is happening? Hold on, Chloe. Julian snapped, his face draining of color as he held the phone to his ear. I'm calling the private banking concierge. There's no way the account is locked. We have over 2 million in liquidity. He weighted his chest, rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The clinical symptoms of an acute panic attack were beginning to manifest: slight tremors in his fingers, tremors in his localized sweating along his hairline, and a sudden desperate searching look in his eyes. Yes, this is Julian Sterling, he barked into the receiver, trying to project his usual corporate authority. But his voice cracked slightly on his last name. My corporate card was just declined and my daughter can't access the secondary accounts. I need this resolved immediately. What do you mean, administrative freeze? I am a joint owner on that account. He listened for 3 seconds before the bank representative on the other end obviously delivered the fatal blow. Julian's arm dropped slowly to his side, the phone remaining active in his hand, casting a cold light against his pale skin. They said you revoked my administrative access, Julian whispered, turning his head slowly to look at me as if he were seeing a ghost. They said the funds are under legal review. Valerie, what did you do? I initiated the liquidation, Julian, I said, setting my coffee cup down with a soft, deliberate click. Every dollar in that account was generated by my hands, my surgeries, and my hours in the trauma bay. Did you honestly believe I would allow you to use my sweat and blood to finance your second honeymoon in Beacon Hill with Eleanor? You can't do this, Chloe screamed, stepping forward, her iPhone completely forgotten as she glared at me with unadulterated rage. That's my dad's money. You're just a bitter stepmother trying to ruin our lives. Sit down, Chloe, I said. I didn't raise my voice, but I injected it with the absolute, undisputed command I use when directing an emergency surgical team. The sheer force of my authority hit her like a physical wall. She stepped back, her jaw dropping, utterly silenced by the terrifying coldness in my eyes. Before Julian could utter another word, the grand front doorbell echoed through the high ceilings of the estate. Ah, I said, glancing at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was exactly 9 o'clock. That will be the private security detail Marcus Vance retained. They are here to supervise your departure. Security? Julian choked out, his slick marketing charm completely disintegrated into raw, pathetic desperation. Valerie, please. We can talk about this. We don't need to do this through lawyers. It was just a temporary separation. The separation is permanent. Julian, I said, walking past him toward the front foyer, where 2 large uniformed security guards were already standing with a legal eviction notice in hand. Leo followed closely behind me, his shoulders back. His posture finally relaxed as he realized the monster in our house had been completely neutralized. As the guards handed Julian the paperwork and pointed toward the single suitcases they would be allowed to pack, I stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the man who had tried to play me for a fool. His empire of sand was washing away in real time, and my hands were perfectly clean. The amputation was complete. The patient was dead, but the surgeon had never felt more alive. The front door of our suburban estate clicked shut with a heavy final thud, cutting off the echoing remnants of Chloe's hysterical shrieks. The silence that filled the grand foyer was instantaneous, thick, and incredibly foreign. For 7 years, this house had been vibrating with the noise of Julian's manufactured corporate emergencies and Chloe's superficial digital drama. Now, there was only the soft hum of the central air conditioning and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I turned to look at Leo. My 16-year-old son was standing near the bottom of the winding oak staircase, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his school hoodie. His eyes, usually clouded with the quiet anxiety of a boy trying to navigate a minefield, were completely clear. "Are you okay, Mum?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly, but grounding me instantly. I walked over to him, resisting the urge to treat him like a child, and instead looked him directly in the eye, professional to professional, mother to son. "I have never been better, Leo. The malignant growth has officially been removed from this house. Are you ready for school?" He gave me a small, knowing smile, the first genuine smile I had seen on his face in months. "Yeah, I'll catch the transit line. Go do what you have to do." He threw his backpack over one shoulder, squeezed my arm tightly as he passed, and left through the side door. I stood alone in the center of the foyer, the morning sun casting long, sharp shadows across the polished herringbone floors. My hands were perfectly steady. I checked my watch. 15 a.m. The first phase of the systemic shutdown had been executed flawlessly, but an experienced surgeon knows that the initial incision is the easiest part. The real work happens in the deep tissue, where you have to tie off every single microscopic bleeder to ensure the patient doesn't hemorrhage on the table later. I walked up the stairs to my master bedroom, pulled a crisp, sharp grey Max Mara suit from the closet, and stripped out of my navy blue hospital scrubs. I spent 20 minutes doing my hair and makeup with clinical precision, applying a shade of dark red lipstick that felt less like cosmetics and more like war paint. By 1:30 p.m., I was pulling my car into the underground parking garage of a towering glass skyscraper in Boston's financial district. At exactly 2:00 p.m., I walked into the penthouse suite of Vance and Associates. The office was an exercise in old money intimidation, floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the glittering expanse of Boston Harbor walls, lined with dark walnut paneling and centuries-old legal volumes, and a receptionist who looked like she had been bioengineered for the upper echelons of New England society. Arthur Vance was waiting for me at the door of his private conference room. He was a man in his mid-50s with immaculate silver hair. Sharp blue eyes, hidden behind wire-rimmed reading glasses, and a reputation for treating high-profile divorces like scorched earth military campaigns. "Valerie," Arthur said, his voice a deep, reassuring baritone, as he pulled out a leather chair for me. "You look remarkably put together for a woman whose husband just attempted a corporate-sponsored abandonment this morning." "I am a trauma surgeon, Arthur," I said, setting my designer briefcase onto the polished mahogany conference table. "I don't get messy. I get methodical. Tell me the vitals." Arthur smiled, a slow, dangerous expression that made me incredibly glad he was on my payroll. He opened a thick manila folder and slid a series of printed, notarized documents across the table toward me. "Julian and his daughter have officially been served with the 30-day separation agreement and the emergency trust eviction notice." Arthur began tapping his fountain pen against the paper. "Because you are the sole trustee of the Residential Asset Protection Trust. The eviction is airtight. He can yell at the security guards all he wants, but legally, he is a trespasser if he steps foot back on that property without your express written consent." What about his marketing firm? I asked, leaning forward, my eyes scanning the legal clauses. The withdrawal of your medical corporation's financial guarantee was processed at exactly 9:35 this morning, Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. I received a frantic call from the managing partner of his agency about 20 minutes ago. Julian's 18% minority stake is officially worthless as of this afternoon because the board of directors is currently voting to oust him to prevent the entire firm from going into default. He has no salary, no corporate line of credit, and no office. Good, I murmured, my voice devoid of malice, stating it simply as a clinical fact. And the liquid assets, the 2.4 million in the Boston Trust wealth management account, is entirely frozen under a temporary asset protection order, Arthur explained. I have filed a motion showing that 92% of the capital in that account was deposited directly from your personal surgical equity over the past 7 years. Julian's legal team will have to fight through a mountain of forensic accounting just to request a discovery hearing, which will take at least 6 months. As of right now, he is functionally broke. Arthur paused, taking off his reading glasses and looking at me with a mixture of professional curiosity and profound respect. Valerie, I need to ask you standard protocol before we file the final paperwork. Are you absolutely certain about the fault-based divorce trajectory? Once we file based on adultery, the public record opens up. Julian's slick reputation in this city will be permanently obliterated. There is no path back from this. I looked out the massive glass window, watching a massive cargo ship slide slowly out into the cold, grey Atlantic Ocean. I thought about the 8 months of lies, the smell of Tom Ford perfume in my bathroom, the smirk on Chloe's face and the text messages detailing how I was nothing more than a mindless cash register for their luxury lifestyle. I am entirely certain, Arthur, I said, my voice dropping into that quiet, chilling register. Julian wanted to take a break from our marriage to live like a wealthy bachelor. I am simply making sure he experiences what it's actually like to live on his own merits. File the complaint. The next 48 hours moved with the terrifying, beautiful precision of a multi-car organ transplant operation. Every step was synchronized, every dependency mapped out, every legal lever pulled with maximum force. On Friday morning, I took a mandatory personal day from the hospital, a rarity for a chief surgeon. But my administrative dean understood that when Dr. Valerie Sterling requested a day off, it was non-negotiable. My first stop was the high-end Porsche dealership in Burlington, Massachusetts, where Julian had proudly leased his customized metallic black Porsche 911 Targa 2 years ago. I walked into the showroom wearing my Max Mara suit, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. The general manager, a slick man named Christian, who had personally delivered the car to our estate for Julian's birthday, recognized me instantly and hurried over with a wider smile. Dr. Sterling. What a wonderful surprise, Christian said, bowing slightly. Is there something we can do for you today? Is Julian enjoying the Targa? Julian is no longer driving the vehicle, Christian, I said, pulling a certified copy of the separation agreement and the vehicle's original title registration from my briefcase. As you can see from the documentation, the vehicle is titled solely under my medical group's corporate umbrella. Julian's credit was a catastrophic mess when we signed this lease, so I was forced to act as the primary guarantor and sole owner. Christian's smile faltered slightly as he skimmed the legal paperwork. I see. Well, the payments have always been on time, Dr. Sterling. The payments were on time because they were automatically debited from my private account. I interrupted him calmly. As of 8 o'clock yesterday morning, that authorization has been revoked. Furthermore, per Section 4 of the lease agreement, as the sole titled owner, I am reporting the vehicle as unauthorized use by a third party. I would like you to initiate the immediate GPS-tracked asset recovery protocol. Christian blinked, completely stunned by the cold efficiency of my request. You want us to repossess the car from your husband, from a non-owner who is currently in breach of our marital contract. I corrected him smoothly. I believe the vehicle is currently parked outside a luxury residential complex at 142 Beacon Hill. I suggest your recovery team moves quickly before he attempts to hide the asset. Within 45 minutes, the paperwork was processed. I sat in the dealership's luxury lounge sipping a sparkling water, watching on a digital tracking map as a heavy-duty flatbed recovery vehicle was dispatched to the historic wealthy streets of Beacon Hill at exactly 11:45 a.m. My phone buzzed with an automated confirmation email from the dealership, complete with a photographic attachment. The image showed Julian's pristine Porsche 911 Targa being lifted onto the back of a tow truck directly in front of Elena's elite penthouse. In the background of the photo, you could see the distinct, horrified reflection of Julian, standing on the brick sidewalk in his slippers, waving his arms frantically at the recovery technicians, while neighbors looked on from their brownstone windows. I saved the image to my secure cloud drive, deleted the notification, and drove to my next destination, the private wealth management branch of Boston Trust. The private banking concierges had known me for nearly a decade. They were well aware that my surgical practice generated millions in liquid capital annually for their branch. When I presented the court-ordered asset protection mandate signed by a superior court judge, the process was entirely clinical. The teller, a professional woman named Sarah, looked up from her screen with a mixture of sympathy and awe. Dr. Sterling, everything is in order. We have officially separated the accounts. The joint luxury wealth line has been permanently dissolved. Thank you, Sarah, I said. Please ensure that exactly $5,000 is transferred into a newly generated basic checking account under Julian's name alone. I want it clearly documented in the bank transaction ledger that he was not left destitute. Of course, Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. And the remaining balance of $85,000 from your recent personal deposit. Move it into my private encrypted offshore trust account, I replied. By 2:00 p.m., I was standing inside the office of the regional telecommunications provider. Within 10 minutes, Julian and Chloe's luxury unlimited data enterprise lines were completely severed from my corporate family plan. Their devices were instantly dropped into emergency roaming mode, rendering their expensive iPhones functionally useless unless they connected to public Wi-Fi. I returned to our quiet suburban estate as the afternoon sun began to dip behind the historic pine trees. A commercial locksmith was already waiting in the driveway, his van filled with high-security electronic deadbolts. Change every single cylinder, including the wine cellar, the detached garage, and the master suite. I instructed him, handing him a fresh cup of coffee. I want an entirely new encrypted digital keyway system that can only be accessed via biometric fingerprint or a rolling master passcode on my personal phone. You got it, Doc, the locksmith said, pulling out his tools. By 6:00 p.m., the transformation of my life was complete. Every action I had taken over the past 36 hours was entirely legal, thoroughly documented, and completely irreversible. I walked into the kitchen, where Leo was already sitting at the quartz island, quietly doing his advanced calculus homework. He looked up as I walked in, noticing the quiet, radiant sense of lightness that seemed to surround me. You look different, Mum, he noted softly. I am lighter, Leo, I said, putting my arm around his shoulders and kissing the top of his head. The weight of carrying dead tissue is finally gone. But as I stood there looking out at the darkened lawn, my phone began to vibrate violently against the counter. The screen lit up with a string of numbers I didn't recognize. The first wave of the inevitable, frantic counterattack was about to begin. The incoming calls did not stop. By Saturday morning, the silent vibrations of my phone against the marble kitchen island had become a steady, mechanical hum. 7 missed calls from numbers utilizing the Beacon Hill area code, 3 from unlisted enterprise landlines, 2 from an automated burner app. I sat at my home office desk, dressed in a comfortable cashmere sweater and leggings, calmly sipping an Americano while I watched the digital onslaught unfold. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I waited for the notifications to register as voicemails opening my secure laptop, to route the audio files directly into the Sterling divorce encrypted folder that Arthur Vance had established on my cloud server. The first voicemail dropped at 9:14 a.m. Julian's voice was stripped of its characteristic velvety marketing cadence, replaced by a jagged, breathless panic that felt incredibly satisfying to analyze from a clinical perspective. "Valerie, answer your damn phone!" He hissed, his voice echoing slightly as if he were pacing inside Eleanor's tiled master bathroom. My Amex was just declined at a commercial client breakfast at the Four Seasons. The manager had to pull me aside. It was humiliating. "And where the hell is my car?" The building concierge said it was towed, but the police have no record of an impound. "Call me back immediately. We need to clear up this administrative mistake." The second voicemail arrived 2 hours later, the panic officially mutating into unadulterated rage. "What did you do to the banking accounts, Valerie?" He roared into the receiver, completely abandoning any semblance of corporate dignity. "I can't even log into the wealth management portal. Sarah at Boston Trust told me the account is under an administrative hold. This is highly illegal. You cannot legally starve your husband of marital funds. I am giving you exactly 10 minutes to lift this freeze, or I am calling the Boston Police Department to report financial coercion." I listened to the recording, once noted the timestamp, and dragged the file into the evidence cache. A police department would not interfere with a validated domestic trust asset protection order signed by a superior court judge. Julian was shouting into a void of his own making. The third message wasn't from Julian. It was Chloe. Her voice was high-pitched, venomous, and dripping with the absolute indignation of a privileged child whose lifeblood had been abruptly cut off. "You are a truly pathetic, bitter woman, Valerie," she screamed, the audio clipping slightly from her proximity to the microphone. "You think cutting off my dad's corporate cards makes you look powerful? You're just a sad, sterile doctor who spends 24 hours a day cutting up dead bodies because no one can stand to be in a room with you. You're proving exactly why my dad left you for a real woman like my mum. Grow up and give us back our money." I saved her file with the label Evidence Chloe Verbal Harassment 01. I felt absolutely no emotional resonance from her words. To me, her screaming was identical to the incoherent babbling of a patient coming out of deep anesthesia, meaningless reactive noise. At exactly 3:00 p.m., the final piece of clinical data arrived in my inbox. The subject line read Sterling Julian, Final Surveillance and Digital Documentation Package. It was from Marcus, the high-stakes digital forensic investigator I had retained through Arthur Vance's firm. I opened the compressed file, and a chillingly detailed portrait of my marriage over the past 8 months materialized on my screen. Marcus's team had been remarkably thorough. There were dozens of high-resolution time-stamped photographs of Julian and Eleanor together, savoring vintage wines at an intimate corner table at Ostra in the theatre district, walking hand in hand through the cobblestone alleys of Acorn Street, sitting inside Eleanor's customized Range Rover outside a luxury boutique on Newbury Street. Julian's face, illuminated by a soft, romantic smile I hadn't seen directed at me in half a decade. But the definitive, fatal evidence lay at the bottom of the file. A comprehensive export of image metadata retrieved from a secondary iPad that Julian had carelessly left synced to our home network before his departure. It was a 3-way group chat titled The Transition Plan. The participants were Julian, Eleanor, and Chloe. I scrolled through the logs, my eyes tracking the text blocks with cold mathematical precision. Julian, Valerie just took an extra 24-hour trauma shift this weekend. She won't be back at the estate until Monday morning. Eleanor, let's book the dinner reservations at Mama Maria. Eleanor, perfect. Make sure Chloe deletes any location tags if she posts from the house. We don't want the doctor getting suspicious before we secure the Beacon Hill lease. And then the message that cut through whatever residual humanity I held for my stepdaughter. A text from Chloe. Sent exactly 3 weeks ago, Chloe. Don't worry, Eleanor. The doctor is completely oblivious. She spends all her time in the OR playing God. It's almost too easy to use her secondary corporate cards for our weekend shopping sprees. She just pays the balance without reading the line items. She's a mindless cash register. I sat in the absolute quiet of my office, the digital evidence casting a stark white glow across my face. There were no tears. There was no heavy breathing. There was only the grim, profound satisfaction of a surgeon who had successfully mapped out the exact margins of a tumor before making the first cut. They hadn't just been betraying me, they had been mocking me, living off my grueling midnight labor while treating me like an illiterate fool. I forwarded the entire data packet to Arthur Vance with a text. The tumor is fully mapped. Initiate the final surgical removal. Arthur's response came 60 seconds later, filing the fault-based divorce complaint at 9:00 a.m. Monday. Secure your perimeter, Valerie. This is where it gets incredibly ugly. By Monday afternoon, the legal shockwave hit the Seaport district. As I walked out of a successful 4-hour spinal reconstruction surgery, I checked my personal iPad in the surgeon's lounge. Arthur Vance had sent a simple confirmation text, served. Both of them. Julian was served in the lobby of his marketing agency during their weekly partner meeting. Chloe was served at a luxury spa in Back Bay. The fallout was instantaneous. Julian's ability to borrow random phones seemed to peak around 2:00 p.m. When I opened my secondary messaging application, a series of frantic, disjointed text blocks from an unlisted number flashed onto the screen. Valerie, you have completely ruined my career. The text read, the syntax erratic, completely devoid of his usual polished marketing structure. The board of directors just suspended my partnership, pending an internal financial audit, because you withdrew the commercial line of credit guarantee. I was escorted out of the building by security in front of my entire creative team. You are committing corporate sabotage. I am going to sue you for every single dollar you make in that hospital. You are a monster. I took a slow sip of ice water, my mind completely detached from his panic. I didn't reply. I simply took a screenshot of the text, added it to the legal repository, and blocked the number. He had spent 7 years building an empire out of my credit line. He had no right to act surprised when the foundation vanished because he chose to break the contract. When I arrived back at the estate that evening, the air was crisp and cool. Leo was sitting at the marble island, eating a bowl of pasta I had prepared for him the night before. He looked up, his expression a mixture of relief and cautious observation. Wyatt. I mean Julian. He tried to call my personal phone today, Mum, Leo said softly, correcting himself instantly. I paused, setting my briefcase down. Did you answer, Leo? No, Leo said, shaking his head firmly. I blocked him immediately. I know what he's trying to do. He wants me to feel bad for him because he doesn't have his car or his money anymore. But I remember how he used to talk to you when he thought I was wearing my headphones. He isn't a good person, Mum. A profound sense of pride swelled in my chest. I walked over, squeezing his shoulder tightly. You don't owe him your peace of mind, Leo. You are protected here, always. By Tuesday morning, however, the strategy of the Sterling duo shifted from private desperation to public warfare. I was in the middle of pre-operative charting for a complex pelvic fracture when Dr. Evelyn, the chief of emergency medicine, and my closest friend at the hospital walked into my private office. Her face was grim, her hands gripping her tablet with an uncomfortable tightness. Valerie, you need to look at this. Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a low, protective whisper as she slid the tablet across my desk. One of my residents just brought it to my attention. It's trending locally on TikTok and Instagram. I looked down at the screen. It was Chloe's public influencer page, which boasted a verified blue checkmark and 50,000 followers. She had posted a highly produced 3-minute video shot inside what appeared to be Elena's beautifully decorated sunlit Beacon Hill living room. Chloe was sitting on a plush white buccal sofa, her eyes visibly reddened, her mascara artfully smudged to simulate a state of prolonged emotional trauma. She was speaking directly into the lens, her voice trembling with a terrifyingly manufactured sincerity. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Chloe whimpered, a single tear tracking perfectly down her cheek. But some people show you their true monstrous colors when you least expect it. My dad was just trying to communicate openly in his marriage. He asked his wife for a brief, temporary space to work through some creative and emotional blocks. And how did she react, Dr. Valerie Sterling, a renowned chief surgeon in this city, used her massive wealth and legal power to completely destroy our lives in less than 24 hours. She paused, taking a shaky, theatrical breath before continuing her scripted monologue. She locked us out of our own home using private security guards. She locked my dad out of his bank accounts, leaving him with absolutely nothing. She even had his car repossessed while it was parked on the street and had our phone lines cut so we couldn't call for help. She is an absolute monster, a cold, calculated narcissist who hides behind a medical coat while practicing severe financial and emotional abuse in her private life. Please, if you see her or work with her, know who she really is. I scrolled down to the comments section. It was an absolute digital dumpster fire. Thousands of verified accounts and local Boston users were fueling the outrage cycle. This is terrifying. Dr. Valerie Sterling sounds like an absolute psychopath. How is she allowed to perform surgery on human beings? One comment read, gaining 5,000 likes. An absolute devil in a lab coat. Protect this family at all costs, another chimed in. We need to report her to the Massachusetts Medical Board. Financial abuse is a crime. Evelyn watched me closely, her eyes filled with an intense protective fury. Valerie, this is bad. They are actively targeting your professional reputation. People are already leaving 1-star reviews on the hospital's public portal. Do you want me to have the hospital's public relations and legal teams issue a cease and desist? I looked up from the tablet, my face completely smooth, my heart rate remaining at a perfectly resting 60 beats per minute. I handed the device back to Evelyn and offered her a slow, reassuring smile. "No, Evelyn," I said quietly, leaning back in my chair. "Don't touch it. Let her perform for her audience." "Valerie, they are trying to destroy your career," Evelyn protested, her voice rising in disbelief. "They are trying to play a game of public relations, Evelyn," I replied, my voice dropping into that chilling, razor-sharp, surgical register. But Arthur Vance and the Massachusetts Superior Court do not make decisions based on TikTok algorithms. Chloe just recorded a highly publicized admission that she is currently residing with her father and his mistress in a luxury penthouse, while claiming they are destitute. She just handed us the entire narrative on a silver platter. Let her post. The higher she climbs on that digital stage, the further she has to fall when the trap snaps shut. By Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after the initial rupture in my kitchen, the digital storm generated by Chloe's viral smear campaign reached its absolute peak. The hospital's public relations department was in a state of high-intensity triage, their phone lines flooded with automated bot calls and outraged internet activists demanding my immediate termination. But inside the wood-paneled sanctuary of Courtroom 4B at the Suffolk County Superior Court, the frantic noise of the internet simply ceased to exist. The courtroom was an austere, cold environment where emotions were systematically stripped away, leaving only the hard, unyielding anatomy of the law. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Arthur Vance, dressed in a sharp, structured charcoal suit that commanded the room without uttering a word. Across the aisle sat Julian and his newly retained defense attorney, a middle-aged man named Robert Vance, no relation to Arthur, and significantly outmatched in both resources and tactical intellect. Julian looked thoroughly decimated. The slick, manicured marketing director, who had confidently delivered an ultimatum over avocado toast, was gone. His tailored Italian suit looked slightly wrinkled. His hair lacked its typical meticulous styling, and deep dark circles carved hollows under his eyes. He sat with his shoulders slumped, staring at the mahogany table, as if he could already feel the legal scaffolding collapsing around him. Chloe sat behind him in the gallery, her phone resting face down in her lap. For the first time in her adult life, her expression a toxic mixture of defiance and creeping terror. "All rise," the bailiff intoned, and Judge Margaret Higgins stepped onto the bench. She was a no-nonsense senior jurist, with 30 years of family law experience and an absolute disdain for theatrical nonsense. Judge Higgins adjusted her glasses, opened the thick master file, and leveled a piercing gaze at Julian's attorney. "We are here this morning on an emergency motion filed by the defense to vacate the administrative freeze on the wealth management accounts and to contest the fault-based divorce complaint filed by Dr. Valerie Sterling. Mr. Vance, you may speak for your client." Julian's attorney stood up, adjusting his tie with a nervous, hurried energy. "Your Honor, my client has been subjected to a calculated campaign of severe financial coercion and emotional abuse. Dr. Sterling has unilaterally frozen over $2 million in marital assets, repossessed his personal vehicle, severed his communication lines, and utilized armed private security to evict him and his young daughter from their primary residence, leaving them effectively destitute. This is a clear case of retributive malice designed to destroy Mr. Sterling's livelihood." "Destitute Mr. Vance," Judge Higgins interrupted, her voice entirely flat. "I review the filings carefully before I enter my courtroom. It is my understanding that Mr. Sterling is currently residing in a luxury 4-bedroom penthouse in Beacon Hill, owned by his former spouse, Elena Sterling. Is that correct?" "Well, yes, Your Honor, and it is also my understanding," Judge Higgins continued, her tone sharpening, "that a public digital broadcast was published by Mr. Sterling's daughter, Chloe Sterling, which explicitly details the layout and luxurious accommodations of that specific residence, while simultaneously attacking the professional integrity of the plaintiff. A broadcast that has generated significant commercial damage to Dr. Sterling's surgical practice." Arthur Vance stood up smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke blazer. "If I may, Your Honor, we have submitted Exhibit D into the court repository. It is a comprehensive digital forensic package compiled by certified investigators." Arthur walked over to the defense table, laying a thick binder down with a heavy, definitive thud that caused Julian to visibly flinch. "The defense claims financial coercion," Arthur stated, his deep baritone echoing off the high ceilings of the courtroom. "However, the forensic audit of the Boston Trust wealth management account demonstrates that 94.6% of the capital was generated exclusively by Dr. Sterling's Medical Corporation equity. Furthermore, we have submitted certified text logs retrieved from a shared domestic server dated over the last 8 months." Arthur looked directly at Julian, his eyes cold and unwavering. "These logs explicitly document a coordinated conspiracy between Mr. Sterling, his ex-wife Eleanor, and his daughter Chloe to systematically utilize Dr. Sterling's corporate lines of credit to finance a secondary extramarital lifestyle in Beacon Hill. In their own words, they referred to my client as a mindless cash register, while planning what they termed the transition plan. They were not abandoned, Your Honor. They were caught. The courtroom went completely dead silent. You could hear the faint, rapid ticking of the clock on the back wall. Julian's attorney opened his mouth to object, but the words seemed to die in his throat as he looked at the sheer volume of documentary evidence sitting on his desk. Judge Higgins took the binder, flipping through the printed message transcripts with a slow, deliberate cadence. With every page she turned, the color drained further from Julian's face. She stopped on the final page, the transcript of Chloe's text, bragging about using my credit cards for their weekend shopping sprees, and closed the file with a sharp, echoing snap. I have seen a lot of domestic disputes in this chamber, Judge Higgins said, her voice dropping into a chilling, authoritative register that mirrored my own surgical tone. But the level of cynical, calculated exploitation demonstrated by the defendant and his dependents in this record is truly extraordinary. Mr. Sterling, you entered this marriage with significant debt, which the plaintiff liquidated. You lived in luxury provided entirely by her labor, and you utilized her generosity to facilitate an ongoing betrayal. She turned her gaze to Julian's attorney. The motion to vacate the asset freeze is denied. The freeze will remain in place pending full forensic accounting and a final fault-based property distribution trial. The emergency eviction from the trust property is affirmed. Furthermore, I am entering a temporary protective order. Julian Sterling and Chloe Sterling are ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 500 yards from Dr. Valerie Sterling, her son Leo, and her medical practice location. Judge Higgins locked eyes with Chloe in the gallery. And if another digital broadcast video or comment attacking Dr. Sterling's reputation is published by anyone associated with the defense, I will hold you in immediate criminal contempt of this court. Do I make myself entirely clear? Chloe shrank back into her seat, her face turning a bright, humiliated crimson, her hands shaking as she buried her phone deep into her purse. This court is adjourned, Judge Higgins declared, slamming her gavel down. As the judge stepped down from the bench, Julian buried his face in his trembling hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, pathetic, dry sobs. He was entirely ruined his career, dismantled his elite reputation, obliterated his access to my wealth, permanently severed. I had tried to play a game of emotional chess with a woman who reassembled shattered bodies for a living. He had completely miscalculated the margins. I stood up carefully, buttoning my charcoal jacket. I didn't offer Julian a single glance. I didn't look at Chloe. I turned to Arthur Vance, shaking his hand with a firm, professional grip. Excellent work, Arthur, I said quietly. Go back to your hospital, Dr. Sterling, Arthur replied with a proud, respectful smile. The perimeter is entirely secure. I walked out of the courtroom, my heels striking the marble floors with a rhythmic, powerful cadence. When I stepped outside into the bright, crisp Boston afternoon, the air felt incredibly clean. I pulled out my phone and sent a brief text to Leo. The surgery was an absolute success. Coming home, I got into my car, adjusted the rearview mirror, and looked at my own reflection. The lines of exhaustion from 100 late-night trauma shifts were still there, but beneath them was an undeniable, radiant aura of absolute freedom. The malignant tissue had been entirely excised from my life. The margins were clean, the patient was gone, and I had never felt more alive.